Hey, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're talking about something you probably, walk past every single day without a second thought: dust. But what if I told you that under just the right conditions, the dust in a bakery or a workshop could be an incredibly serious hidden danger? As we're about to see, not all dust is created equal. So, let me start with a quick question for you. Flour, sugar, sawdust, we see them all the time. What could they possibly have in common? I bet the answer isn't what you're thinking. It's actually way more dramatic. Yep, that's right. They can be explosive. I mean, under just the right conditions, these things we use every day, when they're turned into a fine dust, can become as volatile as, say, gasoline vapor. It's wild, and that's exactly what we're breaking down today. All right, so here's our game plan for uncovering this hidden danger. First, we'll identify the explosive ingredient itself. Then we'll look at the 5 conditions that create what's known as the fire pentagon. After that, we'll get into why the second wave is the real catastrophe. And, most importantly, how we can break that chain and prevent disaster using a professional safety playbook. So first up, what even is this explosive ingredient? Look, when we say combustible dust, we are not talking about the dust bunnies under your sofa. We're talking about very specific, finely divided solid particles that can catch fire when they're suspended in the air. And you would be amazed at what can turn into combustible dust. The list is, well, it's surprisingly long. We're talking about everyday stuff, right? Flour, sugar, even powdered milk. But it also includes things like wood dust, plastics, and get this, even metal powders like aluminum. And the key thing to remember here, it's all about particle size. The finer the dust, the bigger the risk. Simple as that. Okay, so this brings us to the real heart of the matter. The pentagon of fire. Now, you've probably heard of the good old fire triangle, right? Fuel, oxygen, and heat. Easy. But for a dust explosion, well, you're going to need 2 more crucial ingredients. And here it is, the full picture, the fire pentagon. And what's so fascinating about this is that having just a few of these elements isn't enough, not even close. For a simple fire to turn into a full-blown, catastrophic explosion, you need all 5 of these things to be present at the exact same moment. So let's walk through them one by one. All right, first up, you obviously need the fuel. This is that combustible dust we were just talking about. The flour, the sawdust, the metal powder. This is the stuff that's actually going to burn. Element number 2, oxygen. And honestly, this one's the easy part. The normal air in any room or building has more than enough oxygen to fuel a massive reaction. So you don't need any special conditions for this one. Third, you need a trigger, an ignition source. And this could be anything, really. An open flame, sure, but also just a hot machine surface, a spark from 2 pieces of metal grinding together, or even something you can't see, like a tiny spark of static electricity. Okay, now for number 4. And this is where things get serious. This is what turns a simple fire into an explosion. We're talking about confinement. The whole event has to happen in an enclosed space. Think a silo, a big pipe, a dust collector, or even just a regular room. It's this containment that lets the pressure build up like crazy to absolutely catastrophic levels. And that brings us to the 5th and final piece of the puzzle: dispersion. See, the dust can't just be sitting there in a pile on the floor. It has to be kicked up, suspended in the air, creating a big combustible cloud. It is that cloud of fuel mixed with air that actually explodes. So, when all 5 of those elements line up perfectly, boom, you get an explosion. But here's the scary part. That initial blast is often just the opening act. Let's talk about the second wave, because that is almost always the real catastrophe. Okay, so you have the primary explosion, right? This one is usually smaller, maybe contained inside a piece of equipment, a silo, a filter, something like that. Yeah, it's damaging, but it's localized. The real danger is the shockwave from that first blast. Because that shockwave acts like a giant gust of wind, kicking up all the dust that's been quietly settling on beams, on floors, on top of other machines, and it creates this huge new dust cloud throughout the entire building. And when that cloud ignites, that's when you get the secondary explosion. And really, if you remember one thing from this, let it be this. The first blast makes a lot of noise, for sure. But it's that second one, that massive chain reaction that rips through buildings and causes the most widespread destruction. And this just perfectly illustrates how little fuel you need for that second wave. We're talking about a layer of dust just 0.8 millimeters thick. To put that in perspective, that's about the thickness of a paperclip or a dime. A layer that thin, spread out over a big area, is all it takes to fuel a monster secondary explosion. It's a massive danger hiding in plain sight. So, okay, we get it. We know the recipe for disaster. The big question is, how do we stop it from happening? Well, the whole strategy boils down to one simple, powerful idea. You have to break the chain. And the logic here is actually beautifully simple. Remember, the explosion needs all 5 parts of that pentagon to happen. So if you can reliably get rid of just one of them, any one of them, it doesn't matter which, the explosion simply cannot happen. That's it. The entire field of dust explosion safety is built right on top of that one principle. So in the real world, safety professionals use 3 levels of defense. The last resort is what we call protection. Think of things like special explosion vents that can safely blow out and release pressure to limit the damage. A step up from that is prevention. This is where you're actively controlling ignition sources. But the absolute bedrock, the foundation of it all, is just good old-fashioned housekeeping. Systematically cleaning and removing that settled dust so there is zero fuel lying around for a secondary explosion. All right, so let's get into our final section here. The safety playbook. How do engineers and safety managers actually take these ideas and apply them in the real world? First things first, you gotta know your enemy, because not all dust is created equal. So samples of the dust get sent to a lab to find what's called a cased value. You can think of it as a rating for just how powerful its explosion would be. A low number, called ST1, means a pretty weak explosion. But a high number, like an ST3, well, that's incredibly dangerous. And the entire safety plan for a facility is built around that one number. Okay, so once you have that rating, it drives a whole safety checklist. And these are the kinds of questions that get asked. Do we know our dust's KISS class? Have we defined the hazardous zones in the plant? Is the equipment in those zones properly rated so it won't create a spark? Is there a written down strict cleaning plan to keep that dust layer below that paperclip thin danger level? And are we controlling those invisible ignition sources, like static electricity, by making sure everything is properly grounded? You know, one of the most dangerous things in any kind of safety plan is a simple misconception. And a really common one you hear is, oh, our dust is wet, so it can't explode. But the reality is that dust settles, right? It dries out. And that dry, forgotten dust sitting on a high-up beam is the perfect fuel, just waiting for a small primary explosion to kick it up into the air. And that pretty much brings us to the end. We've taken apart the dust pentagon. We've seen how these materials we think of as harmless can become, well, incredibly dangerous. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Now that you know the recipe for disaster, where are you going to start seeing these hidden risks in the world around you?